Hello everyone, it's me, your boy Matt, clean shaven and misbehaving. Today I'm announcing the beginning of a new thread of investigation on my channel. One of my guilty pleasures is watching literary analysis, and especially film analysis videos. I have to admit that I'm a fan of Mulder and some other film, TV analysis. It's a nice way to sink your teeth into things without having to think too much about them. I've looked at a few literary channels. I'm not really sure what the most famous ones are. There's probably some that I'm not really aware of, but the ones that I have seen are Jenny Nichols, James Toulos, and Lindsay Ellis. I think those are some pretty popular ones. But no disrespect to them, but I would classify them as product reviewers, right? They're basically reading books, mostly sort of popular contemporary fiction, and they're giving you their opinion on them. Should you buy this? Are they exciting? And yeah, they go into why they think they're interesting, why they think they're good books. But what I think is missing is the real nuts and bolts of what makes good literature. I don't necessarily want this to be coming from an educational or a advanced placement perspective, but if that overlaps a good deal, then so much the better. Right, I'd like to briefly go over a schedule of proposed topics, but I don't want to leave you hanging for today, so I do have a small discussion for you. Small in quotation marks. At the end, though, I have a few feedback questions, so if it's not too much trouble, please stay until the end, or skip to the end, and take a look at those feedback questions, because I'd really appreciate any comments and direction. So the first phase of literary analysis we will focus on is poetry. I think it's a good place to start because literature does not often come in bite-sized chunks, but even a small novel can take quite a long time to get through in any real detail. But poems, on the other hand, especially the sort of modern convention of poetry, where they come in these short verses, they are fairly bite-sized, so it'll give us a chance to go over some basic principles and techniques, the dreaded literary terms, and it leaves us with a nice feeling of accomplishment, right? So the poems I'm going to look at first are, if you've had me in the past, you'll recognize these. So A Narrow Fellow in the Grass by Emily Dickinson will be the first poem we take a look at. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman will be the second. And I really recommend that you get a hold of these poems. They're very easy to find on any simple Google search, or any book of poems for that matter, and print them out, because it's really very useful to be able to write and mark on the poem as we're going through it, and that I think is very, very helpful. So I highly recommend that you, before watching the videos, go ahead and obtain paper copies of those if you can. If not, do what you can. And then these two I would recommend as basic poems. They're fairly simple in terms of, comprehension. They're not going to give, even a reasonably bright middle schooler too much trouble in terms of subject matter. The last two, Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, Mr. Mary Shelley, and Sonnet 18, also known as Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day by William Shakespeare. These are more advanced poems. First of all, they're quite a bit longer, and they have more serious subject matter, and they are a lot more complex. So if you are seeing this after all of them are complete, that should give you a basic guide, right? Now that we have that done, I'd like to give you a brief lesson, right? I would like to take on the enormous task of defining art. What is art? Yeah, this sounds like a scene from Dead Poet Society, right? And someone's going to tell you, burn this YouTube video. It's horrible. It's terrible. He's trying to define art. This isn't laying pipe. We're not defining art. Anyway, whatever. It can't easily be done in a short space, but I do think that my definition of art will be useful and be able to carry us through a whole lot of interesting ideas, right? So that's going to be today's lesson. What is art? See there? And then what is the best kind of art is another idea I have. These are very provocative, I hope. And then the third idea I have is modern music underdeveloped. And that's really these first two I've been thinking about a long time. What is art and what is the best kind of art? Oh, by the way, in that second one, we're not just going to say, I'm just going to give you my opinion. I actually have quite a bit to say about the various strengths and functions and modes of communication that come through in each piece of art, right? So I think that will be very interesting. But is modern music underdeveloped just came to me in a dream. It was revealed to me in a dream not too long ago, probably about a week ago. So I'm very excited to think about that. So apart from poetry, which we're going to go through, and apart from these sort of more conceptual ideas about art, I'd like your feedback. What would you like? Maybe after I get a few of these out, you'll be able to tell me, oh, I like this, I don't like this. I'm just here to pass my English class. I don't want to hear your crackpot ideas, your quasi-intellectual hob-knobbery about art, who knows. So feedback, per usual, per the usual, right? Well, if there's no more questions from the class, then I'd like to get into the super provocative, what is art? Right. All right, so here's my definition. Art is a collection of choices that communicate something that is not rational. Now, you may think that this is very sparse for a definition, but I think that that's part of the beauty in it. It is as pared down as you can get. Because whenever you're arguing about what is art, people will always inevitably say, well, is this art? Well, is this art? And then you'll say, that's not art. And then they'll try to give you an example of how that might be art. So I think this is a sufficiently broad definition to capture any of those test cases while still winnowing out any of the things, right? So I want to point out to you that I have highlighted 3 of these words: choices, communicates, and not rational. And we're going to go through each of those, and I'm going to explain to you what each of those means. Right? So, choices, the first element. Art must be purposeful. Here we have a piece of art that could be described as a single choice. If you're not aware, if you've never seen the Mona Lisa before, she doesn't have a mustache and a very lovely goatee. I'm kind of envious, to be honest. I really can't get that far. I kind of just have a Billy Goat Scruff goatee sometimes. So this is a piece of art that is essentially vandalizing another piece of art. I wonder if he would vandalize the real Mona Lisa if given the chance. I kind of suspect not. But by making this one single choice, he has made a statement. I can't really explain further without going into the second aspect of communication, but we'll get there. But the point of the choice is communication because the choice tells us what the artist intends to convey. If the artist makes a different choice, it conveys something else. This artist could have drawn hearts around her. He could have given her a halo, and that would have conveyed a different message. Of course, I think all of these are conveying a sort of sense of sneaky vandalism, but I'll leave that up to you. The abundance of choices actually is often how we measure the greatness of art, right? If we see a bunch of very purposeful, intentional choices that the artist has made, and they all sort of link together, then that's what we call a good piece of art, right? Think about watching a movie with a friend, and your friend points out an Easter egg or something and says, oh, the artist put this in there as a reference to this. It kind of tickles your brain, doesn't it? It kind of excites you. It makes you feel as if everything is intentional and not just an accident, but has meaning attached to it. I think that's pretty cool. Now, I'm not going to be one of those people that just dumps on modern art, you know? I do think that there is a lot of modern art, and I think it's pretty difficult to assess. It might be the most difficult type of art, in my opinion, to assess. But it's easy to see why people have criticisms of it. The criticism is that this is just all random. It doesn't mean anything. It's not an intelligible message. And I have to agree that I think a lot of modern art has this issue. It's easy for people to throw junk at a wall and just say, oh, just nobody else understands me. I'm such a tortured artist, right? Not all modern art, but some. It may well be that there is a message, but if there isn't a message, if this is just random, if there's no meaning really at all to this, then it's not art, right? And I would even go so far to say is, even if I were to say that something like this is art, there's not too many points of choice here. There's not too many points of choices, of intelligibility. It's just, oh, he made a splattering on the wall. Isn't that artistic? You know, amazing. Not a fan, TBH. Of course, some people will argue that you can take things that aren't art, you can make non-artistic decisions, and that in itself is an artistic decision. Aren't they clever, right? So here we have a famous Andy Warhol, where he's taken the Campbell soup cans, and this could be mistaken for a promotional material mock-up, you know, that's about to be sent to the advertising department or the design department. That would not be art. However, if the way he's presenting it, the way Warhol is presenting this, it becomes art, right? But you kind of hit a weird recursive loop of non-decision. You know, oh, I didn't make this artistic decision. I didn't add anything to this. And that in itself is an artistic decision. You know, it gets weird. But in any case, I would argue that it isn't really even this picture that we're looking at that is the art. It's more so the context and sort of the commentary behind it. You know, if they dug this up in a million years, well, a million years, 10,000 years, they wouldn't really know what to do with it. They probably wouldn't even recognize it as art. Right, so I kind of went over communication while we were talking about the choices as well, right? They're kind of linking together, right? Choices, communication, right? But what are we communicating, right? We have to communicate a message, but not just purely a message. It must go beyond the semantic, right? Semantic meaning, the meaning behind things, right? So if I say cat, I'm just talking about the animal. I'm not really conveying, you know, any connotation or any attitudes behind the word cat, right? So the stop sign is not art because, errant pedantry aside, all it's signifying is for you to stop. You know, all these different stop signs are not art. However, someone might rip a stop sign up and put it in their middle of their front yard and say that's art. Granted, but you know, you do you, boo. Now, this doesn't mean that art does not have rational messages. In fact, I think one of the most important purposes of art is to convey those rational messages a lot more powerfully than you could do just by saying the messages, you know, simply, right? That's the point of allegory, right? when we see things acted out in a story, I have Animal Farm here, then we internalize the message. It really resonates with us a lot more strongly than if we were just told, communism turned into a dictatorship. That's not as interesting to our brains as seeing this story play out, right? But apart from ideas, of course, what is the other purpose of art? Is to evoke emotion, right? Emotion is what you feel when you sing "Oh Holy Night" or something like that, right? It's rising up in you, right? If I were to describe a woman holding a dying man, that probably wouldn't cause you to feel home a lot. If I were to show you the sculpture, well, that might cause you to feel a little bit more. One common categorization of art is either Dionysian or Apollonian. Of course, Dionysus being a Greek god of wine, carousing, and excess, and Apollo being a god of rationality and culture. Now, it's pretty easy to try to say that these are the same ideas versus emotions divide. However, I consider these both to be feelings. It's not just Dionysus is making you feel an emotion and Apollo is giving you a thought. It's sort of, are you going super rational or sub-rational, right? Are you engaging with the divine or are you engaging with sort of the animalistic, right? When you listen to Oh Holy Night, you might feel as if you're coming closer to the divine, right? You have a swelling feeling in your chest, ecstasy, right? When you give into what I'd call the animal side of emotion, you're giving into that sort of lower, baser side, right? If you feel energized by listening to Down with the Sickness by Disturbed, oh, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, then that is the Dionysian. So I would like to briefly recap before we move on. Art is a collection of choices that communicate something that is not rational. But why am I telling you all this? What is the point? What does this have to do with literary criticism? Because this maps out very closely to what our job is as literary critics. Our job is to identify the choices that the artist has made. We are going to determine the effect that they're having, that those choices are producing in us. And from there, we can glean the meaning of the art. What is it that the artist is trying to convey to us? And I don't want to get into a complete discussion of it now, but this overlays well onto the concepts of objective and subjective, words that I'm sure you've heard before and have heard a lot of arguments about. When we identify the choices, that should be a fairly straightforward affair. We're pointing to certain elements of the art. This is an objective assessment, right? When we interpret the effect of those choices, this is a little bit more subjective, but there's sort of an acceptable range, right, of interpreting these choices. Because, well, for one thing, there are motifs and standardized sort of ideas and ways of expressing things, right? If I use black and white, 9 times out of 10, white is going, or light and darkness, right? Light is going to be used to signify knowledge, whereas darkness is going to be used to signify ignorance, right? And also, we're human, right? Art is about being human. If you're not human, skedaddle, because we're all human and we're all going to react to certain things in a certain way, right? We're not so different that someone's going to burst out laughing, when someone dies, unless it's funny, right? Unless they fall down the stairs, that's funny. I don't care who you are. Kids falling off bikes, that's funny. I could watch that all day, right? And finally, we determine the meaning, right? Which is a much more subjective affair. But again, there is a range of acceptable choices, right? Things might hit us in certain ways. People may have slightly different takeaways or different points that they focus on, but there's going to be sort of this range of acceptable interpretations, right? And people think that you can just, when they hear the word subjective, they think that you can just come up with whatever you want, whatever you dang well please. You can't, right? If you think the tone of the movie The Dark Knight was lighthearted and carefree, no pun intended, but you've lost the plot. So let's take a look at this in action. What you're looking at here is the first paragraph from the Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Telltale Heart. The Telltale Heart. I always want to make sure I pronounce that correctly, because I hear people say telltale all the time. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. Why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly, I can tell you the whole story. So the first thing we're going to do is try to identify the different features of this short paragraph, right? Again, this should be objective. This should be things that anybody can point out. Now, the trick and the experience of literary criticism is that you'll have a better understanding of what things to look for, right? What I see when I look through here is that there is an awful lot of punctuation, and kind of strained punctuation, right? You usually don't see so many dashes. You also have a lot of punctuation, that's shortening or cutting up the sentences. In general, the sentences are rather short. You've got some fragments going on here. I'm seeing very sort of short, punctuated, disjointed thinking going on here, right? So now what you want to do is you say, okay, that is my observation, my objective observation is that there are a lot of short, choppy sentences in this short paragraph. Now, what could that signify? Well, use the acting to help you a little bit, right? I think I acted that a little bit well, if I do say so myself. And how did I go about it? I think the effect of these short, choppy sentences is that it has the effect of being quick, right? Quick speed, right? If I were to speak a very long and languid sentence that included several different clauses and was a compound sentence, you would think that I would say it more rather slowly than if I was saying, "Hi, how are you? I'm great, good, goodbye, thank you," right? Besides, let's actually do an experiment. Let's do a slower tone. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? Not terrible, not bad. However, we do have one problem, is that we have these exclamation points. The very first word is followed by an exclamation point. I think that really insinuates that we're going for an upbeat, high energy. Right? That's another trick. High energy, low energy. What do you think this is? I think it's high energy. What do you think? So I think we have quick speech. This guy's speaking quickly. He's thinking quickly. He's acting quickly. He's the wolf from Pulp Fiction, right? So now that we have that down, we need to figure out what is the author trying to convey with this sort of style. Does this person strike you as being really mentally all together? I don't think so. He's starting to talk about hearing all things in heaven and hell. He's talking about disease. talking about madness. These are some good signs, right? Do mad people talk quickly sometimes? I think they often do. I think there's that quick thinking but disjointed thinking. Everything is kind of choppy and muddled here. He's got this one thing on his mind that he kind of keeps repeating over and over, right? So I think we can easily say that the point of the choppy, short, punctuated speech is to indicate that he has quick speech, and that is adding to the effect that he is in a frantic, excited state of mind, and very possibly insane. Now this is just one paragraph, right? I think that was fairly simple, but if you're not practiced, then this might be a lot more than you were expecting to get out of it, right? And that's the advantage of practicing and being experienced in literary criticism. You're just going to be able to pull out so many more things. You're going to be able to see those choices in action, right? So, and like I said, use the acting. If you read this like you're reading the back of a cereal box, you're not going to be successful. Art is about being human. So do try to be human. And that's the end of our first lesson. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is some ideas for feedback, right? We talked about the ideas for the channel earlier. So if you would be a help and write those down below in the comments or send me a message, then that would be extraordinarily helpful to me. Second is, I've been at this for a little while, but my technical setup just is not great. I don't know, guys. I'm not too good with this editing stuff. So if anyone has any idea, or, I've tried to learn, but it's just a pain, and it's a real pita, but what are you gonna do? And the third thing is kind of the most important thing I want to talk about right now, because I believe that the best way to strengthen a enterprise is by offering value, right? I'm here to create things that people are interested in looking at. Unfortunately, a huge amount of the things that I create are not YouTube videos. So in particular, I'm talking about my amateur writing enterprises, right? So my question is, when I'm looking at other channels and other people, a lot of them put their sort of marketable materials front and center, right? They say, hey, I'm selling this, or hey, I'm doing this. And I certainly don't have any intentions of mass retail or attempting to get rich or anything. But I do have a few things that I would like to show people, and I'd love for people to look at and read. And I wondered if you think it would be bad to have them at the beginning, or if it would be bad to have them at the end, or better, or okay to have them at the end. My worry is if I put it at the end, then people are just not going to see it, right? But anyway, I would be very glad for any feedback, and I really hope to hear from y'all soon. Y'all have a great day now, you hear?